Good morning, class. Hope you had a pleasant weekend. As we continue our journey in managing people, one of the new topics that we'll be covering today is understanding the importance of decision making and specifically looking at how important decision making is as a management skill. Today, we'll look at what is decision making. And what do we need for good decision making to actually occur? And then finally, we'll be looking at the decision making process. When we look at decision making, it's all about creating alternatives. And invariably, what we see is that decision making is very closely related to problem solving. So, before we can look at effective decision making, we first have to follow very specific we have to focus on what is the problem, because the nature of our decision making will be related to the nature of the problem that our decision is going to actually solve. Point number one. And then also, we're going to look at what type of actions are we going to need to take in order to solve the problem through effective decision making. It's an important point is that we must understand that decision making is a management skill. And as I told you before, is that when we deal with skills, it means that it is possible to learn. A skill is something that we learn, and therefore we can become aware of how to be more effective in our decision making as managers. And then lastly, as managers, it's always important always to remember not to always rely on intuition. Another word for intuition is the proverbial gut. Oh, I feel that this is possibly the solution. That is not always a good management principle to follow with regards to decision making. So, what do we need for good decision making? We need to create and identify various options that are available to us in terms of creating those alternatives, not just coming up with one solution to a problem, but maybe coming up with multiple solutions. And that comes through clarity of our judgment, that we are informed as far as before decisions comes up, we create evidence, we create alternatives, and that gives us clarity of judgment. Once we have made our decision, what decision we're going to follow, we need to make sure that we apply relevant resources into that implementation of the decision that we are in fact making. And that comes to the last point here, is that whenever it comes to decision making, it requires effective implementation. Correct resources needs to be allocated, people, time, financial resources, in order for our decision to be effectively implemented. Now, what's important here, and I want you guys to really focus on, let's look at a process. A process is always handy as how can we actually make sure that we achieve the objectives of effective decision making? And what we will be looking at here now is a process, a step-by-step process that we can follow as a guide in order for us to achieve our objectives of problem solving and effective implementation. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to define what the problem actually entails, understanding the problem, because as I said earlier, the solution is going to be related to the specific problem that we are facing. We're then going to identify criteria to make decisions in terms of what factors do we need to consider before a decision needs to be made. We're then going to allocate ratings to that criteria, which means we're going to look at not just one solution to our problem, but we are going to look at the alternatives that are available for us, so that our decision making comes and evaluates multiple solutions to a problem. And that comes up develop various alternatives, making sure that, like I said, we're not one dimensional, means we're not just going to come up with a one solution, but that we have looked at those alternatives. We're going to evaluate or rank those alternatives, and ultimately, we are going to make sure that we are going to choose the correct option to solve, again, coming back to our original problem that we looked at. And then finally, we're going to select the alternative that best solves that particular problem that we are facing within the organization, within our team. And I think that is a very nice step-by-step process that we can follow in order to achieve our objective. Lastly, a reminder is that once you have completed this topic, we will then look at an additional method that we can use as managers, and we will do a full evaluation of how we can, in fact, use and prepare this decision-making process, accompanied by what we refer to as a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And like I said, this is a very good technique which we can use in order for us to become more proficient in our abilities to make decisions. See you in the next video.